to our CADMR seminar. And I think that this is great to see everyone because I believe it's the last seminar until the fall. So we thank everyone for coming. We have a really exciting topic today and wonderful presenters. So welcome everyone. And it's great to see representation from multiple academic institutions in the state as well. We have two wonderful presenters today. Our first presenter is Dr. Lucy Anang Ingram. She is an associate professor in the Department of Health Promotion, Education, and Behavior, and she's also the assistant dean for academic affairs and online education. Dr. Ingram was awarded her PhD from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and her PhD is in health education and health promotion. She also was awarded previously, prior to that, her Master of Public Health degree, also at the University of Alabama. And she completed her Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology at Emory University. So Dr. Ingram is no stranger to Southern living. She received most of her training here, and she has had already just a phenomenal impact on the field. Her research interests are in sexual and reproductive health. And typically she examines racial and ethnic health inequities. And her ultimate goal is to improve health for all across the lifespan. She has authored more than 60 peer-reviewed publications. She co-leads the research education component of CADMR. And she also, we just submitted a P50 grant with the NIMHD that just was submitted in late June. And on that grant, she's also co-leading the research education component of that grant as well. Our second speaker is Dr. Daniela Friedman. Dr. Friedman is the professor and chair of the Department of Health Promotion, Education, and Behavior at the University of South Carolina. She is also a faculty affiliate in the Prevention Research Center and the Women's and Gender Studies program, and she's a core member of the Cancer Prevention and Control program. Dr. Friedman received her Bachelor of Science degree in Biology and Psychology from McMaster University in 2000. That's in Hamilton, Ontario, I believe. She also received her MS in Health Studies and Gerontology from the University of Waterloo in 2002. She received her certificate in university teaching from the University of Waterloo in 2006, and her PhD in Health Studies and Gerontology from the University of Waterloo in 2006. So you can see that we have an international team of presenters today. We're really excited. Dr. Friedman's areas of research are health communication, health literacy, healthy aging, disparities research, and cancer screening. And she is the author of more than 170 peer-reviewed publications. I think it's approaching 200 now, peer-reviewed publications. She's also one of the principal investigators of the CADMR, along with Dr. Sue Lefkoff, and Dr. Friedman also co-directs the University of South Carolina Office for the Study of Aging. So please join me in welcoming our internationally and nationally renowned speakers, Drs. Lucy Ingram and Daniela Friedman.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ford, for the very kind introduction. And we're so glad that everybody could be here for our CADMR seminar series. We're going to have a little bit of interaction today. So hopefully you have the chat box in your Zoom room that you're able to view it. And we might be asking you a couple of questions. So we look forward to seeing some of your responses in the chat box. All right, hopefully I can move the slides along, and here we go. So the title of our talk got a lot of attention, and this has gone through a lot of listservs and social media. And so when you have a title like Aging and Sex in the Media, you're going to get a lot of interest. So here we are, and we can probably do over an hour seminar for this, but we'll start with an hour, and then we'll see if there's more questions and interest for us to continue this type of seminar. All right. So you know those magazines that you see when you're in the grocery store line and you're about to check out, and they have really juicy headlines. So here's one for you, and it's from a magazine like that, and it's from the UK, and it says, forget Sudoku. If you really want to improve brain power in old age, regular sex is the key. Researchers have finally confirmed that frequent sex really is the key to staying sharp in old age. So we thought it was the brain games, but there are other strategies that may be more effective. And so that's what we're going to talk about a bit today. So how did this line of work and Lucy Ingram and I getting together to put together this presentation and collaborate on this work? In 2017, Dr. Haley Wright from Coventry University sent me an email. She had heard of our CDC-funded Healthy Brain Research Network. She had heard of some of the work we were doing in South Carolina around cognitive health and cognitive aging and perceptions about cognitive health. And she'd heard about the work of my colleagues doing work in sexual health. And so she reached out. She wanted to meet at the Gerontological Society of America conference. We met for the first time. We hit it off. We're going to tell you more about her work and why she was interested in reaching out to us. But we met at GSA, and then she invited Lucy and I to go to Coventry University in June 2018, where we met with her colleagues, and we talked about how we can work together in the area of sexual health, aging, and cognition. All right, well, let's start from the basics here of what is aging, and we'll talk about perceptions of aging. So what is healthy aging? I don't think I can touch my toes. This is pretty amazing. So the CDC Healthy Aging Research Network, and some of you on this call were part of this network for many years. And I know, I think Catherine Leaf is on the call, and Sarah Wilcox was very involved with this network. And this network defined healthy aging in a very holistic way, the development and maintenance of optimal physical, mental, and social well-being and function in older adults. And this definition really does reinforce the socio-ecologic view of the determinants of health. And so what do we think about older people? Okay, that's the definition of aging and what aging means. So what do we think about older people? This figure represents the communication predicament model developed by Ellen Ryan and colleagues. And let me walk you through it. And I'm going to ask you to be by your keyboard and in the chat box, which I can't see on my screen right now, but hopefully I will when you start typing, answer some of these questions and don't be shy. So when you encounter an older person, how do you know that they're older? What are some cues that you may see that alerts you to the fact that they may be older? Okay, all right. So yes, they may have gray hair, they may walk more slowly, use an assistive device. Okay, and we have a lot for posture, we've got a lot of examples here. What are common stereotypes of how we think older people may act and behave? So that's the next question. What do you think? Okay. All right, good example. So they may have hearing issues. You might think they have poor health. They may talk a lot. They may not talk at all. They may be passive, and there's lots of others that that people are entering. I like that. Know nothing about pop culture. I don't know anything about pop culture, Marty. So repeating themselves. So lots of examples here. Now, what are some ways in which we might modify our speech and our behaviors when we're interacting with older people because of the perceptions that we have about them? So how might we act when we encounter somebody who's older? Okay, talking more slowly, louder, repeating. Excellent. Okay, so yes, also we might be over controlling. We might be over nurturing. Again, we might speak loudly, slowly, repeat ourselves, thinking that the person may not understand us. So these are all great examples. And so that type of behavior on our part, it really reinforces those commonly held aging-related stereotypes and really limits how we communicate with older adults. And this can lead, as you can see in this cycle here, it can lead to lower self-esteem, feelings of loss of control by the older person, and leading to this cycle of poor communication as the older person plays into that stereotype, and others then behave in a way that reinforces the stereotype. Okay, so how can we improve our encounters with older adults? Okay, once we recognize those cues, it's, what can we do? We need to modify our communication to accommodate needs and not play into those stereotypes. So this will really help encourage older people to participate equally in the exchange with them, help them feel empowered, and hopefully this will result in improved opportunity for communication and get us out of that cycle on that previous slide where those communication opportunities become quite constrained and they're quite limited. So this is trying to get us out of that cycle and showed how we can improve our communication with older people. Okay, so to continue our discussion about perceptions, we all see things in different ways, and many of you have probably seen this before. It may be in every social psychology class, but what do you see in this image? So some people may see a young fair maiden. I haven't said the word maiden in a very long time. That sounded odd. A young fair maiden facing away from us, okay? Or, right, and some people may see an older woman. Can you go back and forth between them? What do you see? Can you see them both? Okay, so people are seeing both of them. Okay. All right, so again, all about perceptions here. Let's move on to cognitive and brain health. And I'm not going to read the whole definition. You have it right here in front of you. But this was in a report. NIH was part of this from what I recall. And this really talks about all of the components that are involved in how to maintain your brain and how to maintain cognitive health. I always like to put out a plug for our Office for the Study of Aging and talk a little bit about brain health, but also Alzheimer's disease. And we have a statewide registry focused on Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. Maggie Miller, who is a faculty member in epidemiology and biostatistics, is our registry manager, and she can answer all questions you have about the registry. But just to give you a sense of Alzheimer's disease in South Carolina, when this report was released, since January 1988, our registry has identified close to 286,000 cases of Alzheimer's in South Carolina, and currently about 106,000 of these individuals are still living with the disease. Nationally, every 65 seconds, someone in the US develops Alzheimer's disease. I just wanted to share that with you. Okay, so a next question for you. What are your perceptions of how aging is portrayed in the media? So we've talked about how we perceive older people when we come across them, our communication, in encounters, whether it's a medical encounter in the community, our stereotypes people may have. What are your perceptions of aging in the media? Okay, not a lot of diversity. Other ideas? Okay, thank you, Kaylee. All right. A lot about medication, healthcare needs, okay. All right. Here's an example of looking at brain health and Alzheimer's in the media. So this graph is from a study that examined about close to 200 articles about brain health published across 20 top circulating magazines in the US. So if you look at this, there's you can see the percent of articles on different topics, including potential protective factors such as diet, physical activity, protective factors, how to protect our brains. And so what's interesting here, you can see diet was discussed a lot. At the time this was published, most of the scientific evidence on how to protect our brains, though, it was related to physical activity. That's where most of the science was. As you can see from this analysis, what was presented in the media is not commensurate with the state of the science. So to the average consumer, they may have the perception that all of the vitamins and supplements and the brain games and the mind exercises, even though there weren't too many of them, but that they may have more of an effect on people's brains than physical activity, where most of the evidence was around physical activity. So it's interesting to also see not only how our perceptions of aging in the media and our perceptions of brain health, but what's actually published may not be commensurate with the evidence in the area. So we provided an example of how media might influence our perceptions about aging in the brain. Dr. Ingram is going to take over from here and talk about what is media and talk a bit about media and media literacy and get into sexual health and aging in the media.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Friedman. So what is media? Media is defined as the means through which individuals, groups, and organizations can express themselves and the technology that is used for that expression. We take that a step further to say that each type of media involves both content and also a device or an object through which that content is delivered. And dare I say, most of us have some type of device right alongside us every day, every moment of every day. So in thinking about the different forms of media, there are actually different forms which can be categorized in a variety of different ways depending on the source that you use. But we're going to hone in on 3 different forms for our presentation, at least by way of discussion. So first, you've got electronic media, which does include radio, believe it or not. We still do have that. Television, film, streaming music, videos, telephones, computers, internet, etc., right? Electronic forms of media. We also have print media, newspapers, yes, they still exist, magazines, books, comics, advertising, and etc. What I think is interesting about this category of print media is that all of these can also be found electronically, if you look at them, right? All of those different sources. Okay, next slide, please. Then we have new in quotes, and I put new deliberately in quotes because what's new today isn't necessarily new tomorrow, as many of us know. So the forms presented on the previous page primarily represented one-way communication or one-way flow of information. However, what's of note with new forms of media is that these are more dynamic, right, and user-driven. They're more interactive, right? And so some examples include text messaging, social networking or social media falls into that category. Those funny memes that you get in your phone messages that you search for to try to send to express yourself. Podcasts, online videos, virtual worlds, all of those also are examples of what is defined as new media, okay? So why does media even matter? So now I have a question for you. Get those fingers ready for your chat box. How much media do you think that any one person consumes daily in hours? How much media? Any form of media. 12 hours, 8 hours. How much are we sleeping? 12 hours? I'm speaking to mostly academics. We don't sleep, right? We need sleep. 5 hours, 10 hours. So I've seen the range from 5 to 12. That's a lot of time. So the research actually says that 7.5 hours, 7.5 hours of our time is spent consuming media. That is a lot. So when we complain we don't have enough time, right? Stop those emails, put that phone down. But what's of note is that that does include traditional as well as digital forms of media. And also what we find is that Americans consume the majority, right? If we're thinking about Americans and other folks globally, we consume more media than folks in other parts of the world. So when we go back to this question about why does media matter, it certainly matters. If such a high proportion of our time is spent consuming media, we really should be analyzing or evaluating what we're consuming. So why does it matter? It's the chicken and egg debate is part of it. Does media reflect reality or does media create reality? This makes me think about a TED Talk that I share with some of my students in my health disparities class by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And the title of her talk is The Danger of a Single Story. And she describes how, as a Nigerian author, when she came to study in the States for college, her roommate at the time had never encountered anyone from Africa. And so she would ask her things like, what's your native tongue? What language do you speak? And she's like, English, just like you. Who's your favorite pop star or something? And her response was Mariah Carey. Ever heard of her? Right. And so just thinking about the images that we consume in media and how that can really shape our perspective. There's that word again, perspective and perception of other people and other cultures can be really powerful when we think about it that way. Of note is also that there are different types of exposure to media, right? So sometimes it can be deliberate, where we actively seek out information, and other times it can be unconscious exposure or more passive. And so when you consider the audience who is on the receiving end of that media, how do we ensure that the most vulnerable among us can filter through the loads of media messages and images that one receives regularly? And I don't think my mom would be, well, she might care that I say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. She sends me interesting WhatsApp messages about health and public health and COVID, certainly now, that really calls me to ask her, where are you getting this information? Who's sending you this information? What's the source? What's your opinion about this? How much do you believe it and why do you believe it? And so next slide, then that kind of brings us to an actual framework that we can use to assess, analyze, evaluate, and think about the media that we receive, right? So as Dr. Friedman mentioned and described, what is presented in the media may not be commensurate with the state of the science. And so we really need to ensure that communities and people know how to accurately interpret information that's received in the media. So media literacy is really a framework for understanding messages and helping us to be intelligent consumers of media information, certainly informed consumers, right? So there are these 5 key questions that one can use to help to actually critically evaluate media that they consume, right? And so these range in, who created this message, or as I asked my mom, who's the source, right? Where are you getting this information from? All the way down to why is this message even being sent, right? Why is it being sent? And maybe even I would add 5A or 5B, why is it being sent to me? Right. And so the idea is that by using these questions regularly, the consumer can better formulate their own opinions and also make sense of media, right? And therefore become more media literate. Okay, next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about nuts and bolts. So let's get into it, right? Sex in the media. Let's dive in. Okay, so seeing evidence of sexual images in the media is not a new phenomenon. We see examples likely daily that can be categorized as either suggestive or overt, right? And so suggestive being implies that the images or message is something that makes you think about sex, whereas overt images are messages that are plainly and clearly about sex, sexuality, or sexual relationships. Also, the amount of sexual content in the media has increased over time. And in fact, some would say that the phenomenon is more acceptable as normative and as part of mainstream communication. And of the existing research that is in this arena, most of the studies have been about youth rather than aging or older adults. So if you'll indulge me for a few slides, I am going to share a little bit about research that's been done with the other end of the age spectrum, our youth. And so as Dr. Ford mentioned in my introduction, my work has traditionally been with youth and adolescents around sexual and reproductive health. So through our research with youth, we have found that media use may influence early sexual behavior. Regarding the content of the media, research has also shown that levels of sexually explicit material used during adolescence and young adulthood have been associated with sexual preference, sexual behaviors, and sexual and relationship satisfaction. So again, when we're asking about what is the whole point about media, why does media matter? There are a number of reasons why we should be thoughtful about how much information we consume, what is the content of the messages and media and images that we consume, and then thinking about our loved ones, right, or trusted persons around us, how are they being responsive and reacting to that information. Ultimately, all of this could present an opportunity in public health for delivering counter messaging, perhaps, and images that are of sexual health in nature, or could serve as opportunities to evaluate, again, current sexual content that's being accessed. Okay, next slide, please. So here are a couple of PG examples. So the first one, let's examine this image here. So see, we have what may be a male adult dad figure, perhaps, saying, I think it's time we had to talk about sex, right? And the younger person says, well, what would you like to know, right? And so we talked about the dynamism of intergenerational communication and how traditionally maybe information goes what we would say top down, right, from the adult or the older generation to the younger one. However, as youth become consumers of more dynamic, those new, right, in quotes, forms of media, they may be on the cutting edge of information and can actually inform some of their older contemporaries. And so this is kind of a play on that whole sex talk, right? So the next image is an example of a meme. And so you see here that 1 + 1 = 3 if you don't use a condom. So in my early years in the profession as a health educator, certainly this would have been a phrase that I would use, or an image that I would have liked to have shared. And so I delight in the notion that 1 + 1 = 3 is not the standard mathematical response of 2. That is, if a condom is not used when having sexual intercourse. Okay, next image. And then there's this image. And in sexual health education, oftentimes we share this notion of when you have sex with one person, you have sex with every person that that person has ever had sex with, right? And so this is kind of a representation of that, right? So every a person having sex with everyone their partner has had sex with is depicted here. All right, and so those are just a few examples of images in the media that we have. The next slide. Then how does all of this translate to the other end of the age spectrum, right? And so we talked about and shared about youth in the media, and you saw who was pictured in those images. But what are the implications for aging and our older populations? And so now we're coming full circle back to what Daniela mentioned to us earlier about how we came to get on that plane and fly to Coventry University in England. So just a little bit about Coventry. It is a city in England. It's about 100 miles from London. About the university itself, there are actually about 40,000 students who attend Coventry. So not sure if many of you were even aware of this university prior to this slide. I was not, so I had to certainly do my research and ask Daniela, where the heck are you taking us, right? And so Coventry was the place. And so a little bit in terms of facts and figures about the university, it is identified as the #1 modern university in the Midlands. It is a public research university, the other Midlands, right? Not Midlands here in Columbia. It is an urban campus, and it's also UK's fastest growing university. And some other monikers: first for overseas student experiences, top 30 in the world for international students, and University of the Year for student experience in 2019. And these bullets in particular are going to be relevant to you when we bring it back towards the end of this presentation. So keep in mind these facts about the student experience and international study. So we went to Coventry. I promise we did work, but on the way, we did have a little sightseeing and fun. Daniela played the role of a Lego there. And then the next slide, we did do some work. So on the left, you see images of us preparing, or right before our presentation, to our Coventry audience. And then on the right are actually pictured 2 of the researchers that we're going to be talking about in the next couple of slides as it relates to their work in aging, cognition, and sex. And so holding the baby is actually Dr. Jenks, who's a co-author to Haley Wright, who Daniela mentioned there. And so on the occasion of us going there, she had her first child. So that's who's pictured there. And also her mom was caregiving. And so we had a lot of fun getting to know our Coventry colleagues. All right, next slide. So here we are, and we're back, ripped from the headlines. So what's interesting about this actual real world headline is that this was an homage to what we see on the next slide is Haley's work. So Wright and Jenks in 2016 authored a paper called Sex on the Brain, Associations Between Sexual Activity and Cognitive Function in Older Age. And what happened, as Daniela alluded to earlier, is that the popular media picked up on this research topic, right? And so this was the headline that was focused on her research. And so actually what's interesting about that is we hear as researchers, I'm certainly in this camp of, I kind of focus on my work. I'm not really interested or trained, I feel like, to talk to the media. And what Haley's response was, that's not even what my study is about, right? Nonetheless, it got a lot of media attention and certainly helped with some of the collaborative work that we were doing and what she was doing with others. So a little bit about this study that got a lot of media hype. It was about the relationship between cognition and sexual activity in healthy older adults, and the fact that this area is under-researched, as I mentioned a few slides ago when I focused on our younger population. And so for her study, they explored the associations between sexual activity and cognition in adults ages 50 to 89. And ultimately, the study findings seem to have implications for the promotion of sexual counseling in healthcare settings, where maintaining a healthy sex life in older age could be instrumental in improving cognitive function and well-being. So that's what she was trying to say, right? Whereas our pop media focused on kind of, well, you thought Sudoku was the answer, have more sex, right? To stay healthy longer. As a follow-up to that, recently, these same colleagues published an article. The first article was published in Age and Aging, that journal, and this one is published in Archives of Sexual Behavior. And so the title of this one is Sexual Expression and Cognitive Function, Gender Divergent Associations in Older Adults. And so this was an opportunity for those colleagues to really hone in on what types of sexual activity may be linked to cognition. And so what they found was what she called gendered links, that being differences between men and women, whereby she found, for example, that masturbation among women in particular versus kissing and petting and fondling in men seemed to be linked to cognitive function, right? And so in specific measures of cognitive function were word recall and number sequencing. So certainly I think that these are kind of precursors to maybe more practical or different types of research in this area, but the fact that there were gender-related divergences, we do think is quite interesting and may reflect differences in perhaps biological or neurological mechanisms as it relates to cognitive factors and cognitive reserve later in life. Okay. So now I'm going to shift it back to Dr. Friedman to talk about some other research that's done in the realm of sexuality and dementia.
So just briefly, we'll share a couple of other studies. There's been, whoops, I flew ahead there, I think. There's been some work by Jones and Moyle from 2016. This was actually an intervention that was developed for staff and nursing students who were taking care of patients with dementia. And this intervention involved an electronic resource, a tool to help staff deal with issues around expressions of sexuality by patients with dementia. This can be very challenging for staff working with older adults, and this intervention that involved the resource significantly increased the staff's knowledge about older people's sexuality, improved their attitudes and understanding of expression of sexuality by people with dementia. Something that came across clearly was the importance of having workplace policies, thinking about long-term care facilities, nursing homes, retirement homes, making sure policies are in place and that staff understand the need and importance of having discussions with patients, with families, that in turn can lead to improved quality of life, health, and well-being for patients living in the facilities, those who have dementia. There's been some additional work by Sue Westwood that some people may know. This was one of her papers from 2014. We know that dementia is a gendered issue, disproportionately affecting women. She has focused on understudied populations, specifically the experiences of lesbian and bisexual women living with dementia, and the importance of further studying and also looking at policies which are not focused on these understudied populations. And so she's looking at stigma related to being an older woman, being an older lesbian, bisexual woman, and the stigma associated with having memory loss and dementia. And so she's also doing some very important work in this area. So there are lots of pockets of work in this area focused on sexual health and cognition, sexual health and aging, cognition and aging, some work around media, but we wanted to bring it all together. And that's why Dr. Wright had invited us to Coventry. And so we've talked about areas for collaborative research, and we welcome your ideas as well. We are still collaborating with Coventry. We have looked at and published extensively on what it means to age well in people's perceptions of aging in the US, and they've looked at it in the UK, but we have not done a comparison and contrast. The images that Dr. Ingram showed when we presented this at Coventry, we asked them in their presentations, would they show images like that? And so it's interesting looking at different places and different cultures and what people would think, showing pictures of sexual health, sex in the media, and what people would think about that. The work that's been done on what it means to age well has not all had a sexual health focus, and there needs to be more work done looking at perceptions of aging and aging well among diverse populations. So there's one area that we're talking about moving some work forward. The media images and the case examples that we used were all US based. I think that last image with all of the hands on the back of the woman, that may have been a Canadian website, a Canadian image. So when Dr. Ford said we were international today, we really were international. And so we've looked at cognition and aging in the media. We've looked at brain health and aging. We've looked at sex and aging, but looking at this more in depth of sexuality, cognition, and aging is something that will be important, and also looking across countries. And then, of course, I can never do a presentation without recommending a systematic review or a scoping review, as many of you know. And so there's a lot of work being done, but I don't think it's been compiled. And so it would be really interesting to do an analysis. And I know our colleagues are also interested in doing that. So that might be a way to move some of this forward, to look more in depth at all of the work that's going on and where the gaps are. Because again, people are doing the work in different areas, but bringing it all together, which is, really what Dr. Wright's work is trying to do, though the media headline may have misrepresented it. It would be interesting to take this further and see what other work is out there.
Yes, and so Daniela certainly focused on kind of research opportunities and scholarship. And we had actually an unanticipated project that emerged from this collaboration. And so we developed after our trip there, actually during our trip there, developed an actual course that was a collaboration between our colleagues there. And the title of that course is, because it actually still is going, Sex, Lies, and Mediascape: Misrepresentations Across the Lifespan. And so this was an opportunity for us to combine our student population, so Coventry students, as well as School of Public Health or University of South Carolina students. We quickly established a memorandum of understanding to make sure that we had the logistics in work as it relates to sharing our student populations. We've since had over 500 students from the Arnold School and Coventry to participate in this course, and we did a bit of a brief evaluation. Found that over 80% of students enjoyed taking part in this experience and would do it again. Some of the challenges that have been noted with this class in particular, so it ends up being just a couple of, now module, I'll use that term because we found out early on in our discussions that we use terminology across the globe that means different things in different places. So for us, or the way that Daniela and I were describing it, a module would be a portion of a course, maybe 3 sessions of a course. And for them, a module actually means an entire course. And so by way of translation, there are a few sections of a course. And which course is it, Daniela?
It's our a health promotion course called Consumer Health in a Contemporary Society. So it's incorporated. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Consumer Health in a Contemporary Society, where we have the students from both courses interact with each other online and ask, they review the lectures, they have chats where they interact, they have assignments that they have to collaborate on. So really, we were taking this opportunity from us as scholars to really share it with our students. And so one of the challenges is where I was going that the students have mentioned has been the interface. And so the logistics that we haven't worked out is that their learning management system at Coventry is Moodle, which actually has been used widely, not just in England, but across the globe. And as you all know, for us here, we use Blackboard, which has its own challenges. And so just trying to share that interface. And so our students had to be familiar with Moodle, which is where the course sits. And so that was some of the challenges in terms of the implementation. Other than that, though, the content was really well received. Daniela and I did some guest lectures for this course. And so we are looking forward to doing it again in spring of 22, which may be our last time doing that. We'll see how it goes there. Also, as a result of that collaboration, we have a manuscript under review that describes that collaboration. And so title of that is Fostering Distance Education, Lessons from a United States England Partnered Collaborative Online International Learning Approach. So COIL is the term for what we actually did, and it is a pedagogical approach that's used in distance learning. So that manuscript is under review with the Distance Learning Journal. Okay, next slide. So that is it. That's your content for sex and aging. And one fun fact about these images, which is funny that they're over either of our names. So maybe in older age, Daniela wishes to be able to touch her toes. And then in older age, maybe I can get somewhere close to Miss Ernestine here. So she is actually in the Guinness Book for being the oldest bodybuilder. 85 is how old she is. She's not actively bodybuilding or competing anymore, but that just ended a few years ago. But to bring this even more full circle, on our way back from Coventry in the Charlotte airport, we bumped into Miss Ernestine Shepherd, and she is so fabulous in person, looks better than this image. So yeah, you too can strive to look like that in older age. So that's all we've got for you. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much. Please, everyone, let's give them a hand. This was phenomenal. This was like a keynote presentation. Really great. Well, now we can open the floor to questions. And maybe if I can kick it off with a question that I'm just wondering if, has anyone looked at the effects of looking at sexual activity as a form of exercise or physical activity in comparison with other forms of physical activity and the potential benefits on brain health in aging populations?
That's a really good question. And there's others on this call who may have a better answer than I do. I can just speak to the work that we've done. And a lot of this was part of what we did with the Healthy Aging Research Network and Healthy Brain Research Network, in how we define physical activity and exercise. And we also have physical activity experts on the call. So I hope that they speak up. But the work that we did in analyzing people's perceptions and also looking at media content, we did not include sexual activity. So we were looking at leisure of things like volunteering, gardening, laundry, that long list of activities, but we did not include sexual activity in the work that we had done. But that's a really interesting point. And now I'm going to have to get on PubMed and check. But I defer to others, because I think that, you know, that's a gap and something that would be really interesting to explore as we think about the key words and terms, that if we do move forward with a scoping review, that will be very interesting to see if those fields are combined. But I'm not sure, but I do want to hear from others if they know of studies that have combined those and looked at them with aging.
Daniela, This is Jean Neal-Sturgis, and I have not seen any research while reviewing the research on exercise in older adults that deal with sexual health. So I feel like the two literatures are really treated very independently and separately, probably utilizing different journals and different forums. So, you know, there may be some opportunity for kind of delving into both literatures and combining them in some way. So good point.
Yeah, that's great.
Excellent point. We might be able to add that measure to activities of daily living.
Yeah.
That was exactly my thought, that maybe moving forward, when we ask about activities and activities of daily living and give examples of physical activity or exercise, that we could include sexual activity in that list.
And I think that's a great point and really drives home the point about different perceptions, right? And so with our English colleagues, this is old hat, right? This is not salacious. This is not, you know, exciting in any way beyond the work that they typically do. And I think many of us may have an understanding just about how sex is perceived in different places. And so, yeah, I think there's definitely an opportunity there. Marvella and Jean, thanks for that.
So I think we did have a few presentation attendees whose jaws dropped a little bit from some of the images that we showed.
They just may not have known the title of the talk.
That's right. That's right. But anyway, that was a really good question, and you know, I think moving forward with a deep dive into the literature would be really interesting. And so if people do want to collaborate on that, I'm sure that our UK colleagues would be interested in expanding.
I would love to collaborate because we're proposing to test a physical activity intervention. And I think, you know, we didn't say anything about sexual activity in that intervention. I can see now that would be something really, if it gets funded, to add that. And so it would be great to collaborate because we're actually going to roll out an intervention. That's great. Are there other questions for Drs. Ingram and Friedman?
It looks like Marty had a question in the chat room. Let's see.
Sorry, I'll monitor that. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I didn't even think to look in the chat. Okay. So we heard a lot of great work. Woohoo. Very informative and enlightening presentation. And then the question is, did you, in your media course, did you speak with casting agents, talent agents, or media talent about what has happened to them as they have aged? Wow, great question.
Not in our modules, but now our counterparts there, you know, this was part of a larger pop culture focused psychology class that it appeared in on their end. So on our end, it was the consumer health class. On their end, it was a pop culture class. So I don't know. I don't remember if we saw the full syllabus, but in the parts that we did, I don't know, that was not included, but that's a good question. I don't know how to answer that.
Well, I can just tell you from becoming an older actor that and living with an older actor that the amount of work dries up and the type of work dries up, and it changes, you know, like the sexual enhancement ads you might see on TV are going to be people in their 50s or mid 50s. And then as you start looking like, because we don't know how old anyone is, but as you start looking like you are in your 60s and your 70s, you pretty much are targeted for medications or, various services for the aging. Like you'll see the 40-year-old daughter with the older mother who is now 80. And that's pretty much all that you see as far as media and as far as opportunities for people who actually have worked in the media for a long time to represent themselves.
Thank you so much. Your question reminds me of the Golden Girls show and the way they were portrayed. And I was so shocked to learn that they were all in their 50s.
Yes.
That was filmed. And, you know, if we looked at it today, we would think they were like close to 80, right? But so images, it shows how they've changed, the perceptions have changed over time. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Does anyone have any changes in how they might approach their own work based on the information that we learned today?
Adding sex as an ADL. Let's all do
Uh,
Yes.
this is very interesting because I have done some work using the University of Chicago. You know, they collect the study, longitudinal study, national survey of health, aging, social life. So that actually is very, they include all the questions you're asking. You know, they have sexual activities, they have health, mental health, cognition, and also physical activities. And so I think it'll be interesting to analyze that data after, you know, taking this workshop.
That's great. Thank you, Yi. That's great. And I think that's really interesting. I'd love to learn more about that. And Lucy, what was I guess the version of that in the UK, what was it called?
ELSA, the English Longitudinal Study on Aging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think these are kind of sister surveys. Consider them. Huh?
Yeah, and that made me think. I feel like every presentation this year, I tie in COVID in some way. And Kaylee Byrne, I know she's doing work on social connectedness and maybe even thinking about the timeliness of doing some research on the aging population. How are people's sexual activity going on right now? I'm thinking about the 50 plus population. Is it, you know, are people feeling more socially connected because, or more physically connected because they couldn't be as physically connected with folks outside of their home base? Or is the opposite true, right? A couple of hypotheses can float around there.
Hi, this is Kim. I'm sorry to pop in. This is so interesting. I love this. Thank you for doing this presentation. I'm ready to jump on board. So many questions, so I'm sorry. Has there been a connection with like intimacy and the partner? And so, I mean, like, it sounded like there was kind of a spectrum of study in terms of sexuality, but also a really common thing is your partner dies sometimes. And so then you might be exploring new partners or maybe new self-soothing like masturbation or something like that. So I'm curious, has any work like that been done or incorporated into the studies? Because like this nursing home training, the e-learning, that sounds awesome. Mm-hmm. As a young CNA teenager, when I was a teenager, I walked into an inappropriate for me, totally appropriate for them situation. And I was like, why didn't I get training on that? So super helpful, and policies help, but they weren't partners. So, you know, understanding, helping people understand, like, when you put your parent into a nursing home, maybe being upfront about the training that they may have a new partner that isn't their parent could be helpful. Or it could be a person of the same gender, which hasn't happened before. But a very common thing is later in life to find new intimate partners in a new way. So I don't know, I guess I'm curious how that, has any of that been explored or not so much yet? In any of your courses? No.
No, we didn't come across that specifically for the course. And then the studies that we had presented and pulled from were more around sexual activities with partners. Mm-hmm. But I think that's why compiling some of this literature is going to be really important, because if we want to look at other interventions, look at how we can more accurately portray with our media partners what's actually going on, then that's going to be really important to see what works and been done. Lucy, did you want to add something? That was a really
Yeah,
good.
thanks for your enthusiasm, Kim. I mean, there are a number of different research studies, I think, that are just emerged from your comment there, that have a number of implications based on what we've shared. But certainly, one data point that I can share is that we have seen increased rates of HIV amongst older African-American women in particular, which in the beginning was very surprising, but for a number of the reasons that you mentioned in terms of, you know, if a partner dies or if women get divorced. And Sue, I know you've got your studies that, you know, was kind of the foray into our relationship and how I came to know you about sex over 50 and what's happening with women in particular as they age and their sexual expression and sexual activity. So I'm certain that there probably are some areas of research around that as it relates to intimacy, I think in particular is what you mentioned, but certainly in our preparation for this presentation, we didn't come across it. But I mean, I think that there's opportunity there to dive in, right? And so maybe you can add based on your research.
Thank you so much for presenting. This was so interesting.
I was so I think fantastic presentation. I was going to say something and I totally forget.
I mentioned sex over 8.
No.
Your study.
I think that bringing back to what someone else was saying earlier in terms of COVID and, you know, lack of a partner and in masturbation being something that's available, but how about all the women of this older generation who aren't comfortable with masturbation and who, you know, think that's an evil, that one does not, you know, go there. So, you know, think of kind of the psychological issues that must have brought up. I mean, that could be a really interesting study that one could, you know, another interesting study to add to the plethora of studies that have already been identified as possible ways to go forward. But I can really see that, and particularly in the South. I mean, in Columbia, I remember giving a presentation on my, you know, life after divorce, which was really about how older women can prevent, you know, getting STDs and HIV/AIDS through protection. But we had to kind of couch it in life after divorce because nobody was going to go to a website that said, how do you prevent STDs and HIV/AIDS? So it was a way to reach people. And but when you think about, you know, issues like that, it goes back to the focus of your talk, which is kind of the media and what we think is out there and what we think is correct, that people don't want to go against that. And it might really create, you know, tensions within themselves and unnecessary ones. I mean, that would be a very interesting thing to pursue.
Grace and Frankie, yes, a great show there.
That's great. I think that's a great research question too. So we have a list now, so we have to go back and watch the recording just to review not the presentation, but all of the great ideas that have come up for future research. So that's great.
And it's also interesting about the Frank and Gracie, the interesting response to that. I mean, every older person I know, myself included, thought it was fantastic. I mean, but my daughter, my 30-year-old daughter, oh my God. I mean, how could you possibly have a show? I mean, really just, so it just goes, it's really what the focus of your talk is. You know, how things are portrayed, how we respond to it. And she's an educated doctor, my daughter. She still responded like that.
Well, it's now 1 o'clock and I think the mark of an excellent presentation is just the number of ideas.
Thank you so much.
And this was fantastic. I mean, I'm sure everybody's heads are buzzing with all these new research ideas. So thank you again, Dr. Inger.